Welcome back to the Fulker Lab podcast, where we talk intelligence, strategy, leadership, and discernment. For a long time, I saw myself as a tactician. I'm a U.S. Air Force Weapons School graduate and former instructor there. That's basically the Jedi Temple for doing very precise, very efficient violence. My identity was the tactics guy. If it flew, dropped, shot, or jammed, I wanted to know how to make it do that better. Then something awkward happened. I slowly got promoted. As I moved into bigger rooms with bigger ranks and bigger flags on the wall, I started noticing something that bothered me. A lot of very senior, very smart people were still thinking almost entirely in tactical terms. They were in strategic jobs, but having tactical conversations. It was all about how many sorties, what platform, what's the next op, when the real questions were, what future are we trying to create? And does any of this actually get us there? It was like watching someone use a chainsaw to butter toast. Impressive, but always maybe not the right tool. While I was an instructor at the weapons school, I was also part of a push to start a course on operational art, a course that would explicitly bridge tactics and strategy. It was a great idea, and it failed gloriously. The institution wasn't quite ready to admit that more tactics wasn't always the answer. So I went looking for an education on strategy somewhere else. That's how I ended up at Colonel John Warden's Prometheus Academy. Now, John Warden was the architect of the Desert Storm air campaign. And later, I got to stress test those ideas in the checkmate office at the Pentagon, an Air Force think tank where you're supposed to think ahead, not just think louder. This episode is the story of that shift and how you can steal those lessons even if you never set foot in the Pentagon, a skiff, or the boardroom. One of the first ideas Warden hit me with was that most people in strategic jobs keep trying to scale up their tactical thinking. Sometimes they get lucky. The blind pig finds a truffle. But that is not a dependable way to run a war, a business, or your life. Warden gave us a simple metaphor. You can think like a bricklayer, or you can think like an architect. Bricklayer thinking says, I know how to lay bricks. I'll lay more bricks, faster, higher, maybe diagonally if I'm feeling spicy. Architect thinking starts with, what are we actually trying to build? Why? What does done look like? If you start with bricks, you'll always get a brick structure, even if what you needed was a bridge or a tunnel or maybe just an email. That's what I'd been seeing in those senior rooms, bricklayers with bigger budgets. We could move a lot of metal, ship a lot of product, write a lot of policies, but we weren't always clear on what game we were trying to win. Warden's bottom line was that the goal is to win, not just today's fight or this quarter, but to create a better future and stack the odds in your favor over time. Strategy is the game plan to get there with minimum risk and maximum payoff. Here's the uncomfortable part. Great strategy can survive mediocre tactics. Great tactics almost never rescue bad strategy. You can be the best operator, analyst, or project manager in the building and still be rowing very hard in the wrong ocean. Once that idea settles in, it's hard to go back to obsessing over tactical details without occasionally asking, wait, what ocean are we in? At Prometheus, Warden boiled strategy down to 4 questions that sound simple until you try to answer them. Where do you intend to be in the future? What are you going to apply your resources against? How are you going to apply those resources? And what are your exit plans? Where do you intend to be is your future picture. Not, we want to be better, but here's what winning actually looks like in concrete terms, a few years from now. In his process, you describe that future across key areas, things like organizational health, finances, people, reputation, capabilities, so it has enough resolution to be useful. Vague futures produce vague strategies. What are you going to apply your resources against? Is where his 5-ring model and centers of gravity show up. He tells you to stop seeing your opponent, market, or organization as a pile of targets or problems and start seeing it as a system. Leadership at the center, then essential processes and systems, then infrastructure, then the broader population, and only at the edge the visible action units. Most of us spend our lives pounding away on those outer rings. That's where the noise is, where the fires are, where it feels like real work. And a lot of that time, it doesn't change the system at all. Centers of gravity are the few points in the system where a relatively small change has a big effect. Strategy is about finding those levers, not just doing more stuff. How are you going to apply resources is where parallel operations come in. Instead of poking one thing at a time and giving the system time to adapt, you hit several key centers in a short window, so the whole system has to shift. In a business, that might mean changing your product, pricing, and distribution together. In your personal life, it might mean tackling sleep, schedule, and screen time at the same time instead of tinkering with one habit forever. And then there are exit plans. Strategists think about how to stop, not just how to start. If this works, then what? If it fails, when do we cut our losses? If the world changes, when do we pivot? Tacticians tend to think, we'll keep doing this until someone tells us to stop. Strategists build off-ramps into the plan. In Checkmate, those 4 questions became background music. What future are we actually trying to create? What systems need to change? Where are the levers? How do we sequence this? When are we done? Once your brain starts working this way, it doesn't turn off when you leave the building. At Prometheus, Warden shared his cardinal rules, a kind of strategic common sense guide that's strangely rare in the wild. We've already hit think like an architect, not like a bricklayer. If you're in charge and all you do is optimize the existing process, you're a very efficient bricklayer. The architect in you has to occasionally ask, what are we actually trying to build? Another rule is focus on the future. Value lives in the future, not in the past. Warden loves to point out the Pennsylvania Railroad. They clung to their legacy model instead of imagining a new environment, and they went bankrupt. Translate that to your world. If your main job has been protecting old ways of doing things, you're probably on the wrong side of the story. Then there's concentrate for success, and its evil twin, defend all, lose all. No one has enough resources to protect everything, not nations, not companies, not you. If your strategy is, we have to keep doing all the things we're doing now, you don't have a strategy. You have an emotional attachment to your current to-do list. Strategists choose where to be excellent and are willing to let other things be good enough or go away. One of my favorites is stay out of the Balkans. The Balkans are those high-drama, low-impact projects. They generate lots of slides and strong opinions, but if you ask, if this disappeared tomorrow, would it actually change our long-term success? The honest answer is no. Every organization has its Balkans. Strategy is the courage to say, we're not going there, we're going to Rome. And then, don't underestimate what it takes to win. We chronically lowball cost, time, and pain. Warden's advice is to be conservative. Assume it will be harder, longer, and more expensive than you think. That way, you actually have reserves when things inevitably go sideways. These rules sound obvious when you're listening to a podcast on your commute. They're less obvious when you look at your calendar and realize you've been defending everything, living in the Balkans, and polishing your brickwork for months. One of the more mind-bending pieces of Prometheus is how Warden ties strategy to network theory. He talks about scale-free networks, systems where a few nodes have a ton of connections and most nodes have very few. If you poke a random low-connection node, not much happens. If you poke a hub, a node with hundreds or thousands of connections, waves go through the whole system. He uses simple examples. If a random person makes a statement, almost no one hears it. If someone with millions of followers says the same thing, the system reacts. Same words, different node. And counterterrorism, if you spend all your time chasing individual cells, you can do that forever. The system just regenerates them. But if you go after leadership, financing, communications, recruitment pipelines, the inner rings, you're hitting hubs. And the system's ability to produce those cells starts to stop. In business, signing one random client is nice. Signing the client who influences half the market is leverage. In your own life, tweaking one random habit might help a bit. Fixing a hub, your sleep, your health, your attention management, changes everything downstream. Strategy is asking, what are the hubs here? What are the real centers of gravity? Where can I push once and get 10 benefits instead of one? And ideally, you push on several of those in parallel while the system is still figuring out what just happened. If you feel like you're working incredibly hard and not moving the needle, it might not be a character flaw. You might just be spending your days in the outer rings of the system, chasing symptoms instead of touching causes. So how do you know any of this if you're not writing air campaigns? You steal the logic and shrink the scale. If you're leading a unit or a team, sit down and quietly run Warden's questions. Where do we actually want to be in 2 or 3 years? What does winning look like? Mission, people, reputation, capabilities. What are the systems that really matter for us? Training, processes, relationships, technology. Where are our centers of gravity? The few things that would move everything else. What can we work on in parallel instead of one at a time busy work? And how will we know a plan isn't working so we can stop or pivot instead of doubling down forever? If you're in a company, map your own 5 rings. Who's the real leadership? What are the key processes? What infrastructure and tools matter? Who are your populations, your customers, employees, and stakeholders? What are the visible action units, your products, services, or outputs? Then ask yourself honestly, are we pouring most of our energy into the outer ring, or are we actually reshaping the inner ones? Even if you're just trying to get your life under control, the pattern holds. Sketch a simple future picture for yourself a year from now. What does good look like for your health, relationships, work, money, and growth? Look at the systems that shape your day: sleep, schedule, environment, the people you spend time with. Ask which 2 or 3 things, if you change them, would make almost everything else easier. Those are your personal centers of gravity. Think about small parallel moves you can make there. Decide in advance how you'll know a particular effort isn't working and what you'll try instead. You don't need Pentagon credentials to think this way. You just need to stop asking, what tactic should I use next? And start asking, what future am I actually trying to build? And what levers matter most? For years, I was proud to be the tactics guy, weapons school grad, good at the immediate fight. That's still part of who I am, and tactics absolutely matter. But seeing smart, senior people stuck in tactical loops, and then getting exposed to Warden's Prometheus concepts and using them in checkmate, forced me to upgrade my questions. What future are we actually trying to create? What systems need to change to make that future real? Where are the few levers with the biggest payoff? How can we act in parallel instead of nibbling the edges forever? And how will we know when to stop, pivot, or walk away? Those questions work in squadrons, staffs, startups, school districts, churches, and at your own kitchen table. So here's your homework for the week. The next time you catch yourself obsessing over tactics, the next meeting, the next crisis, the next email, pause for 10 seconds and ask, am I being a bricklayer here or an architect? Then spend a few minutes sketching the building before you go back to laying bricks. Your future self and everyone stuck in your current system will quietly thank you. Thanks for listening to the Folker Lab podcast.